Hello everyone. Today I'm looking at introducing using at least one new stencil that I've just created in celebration of Halloween. So I thought I would use it on a Halloween style page. I saw someone on Facebook that had something a little bit similar to this. I really liked the composition of what they did. I'll try and find out and insert it in the end who it was. They were, mine differs quite significantly from theirs, but I'm starting off by just using some matte medium to collage on some Tim Holtz paper, and this is just their travel postcard kind of set. And I find that it works pretty well. You see me using, like a 45 glue here just to stick down the edges. Once you have these pages bound into a journal for a few years, this kind of collage just tends to gradually tear away, and it kind of doesn't matter what you've used to glue it on. And here's the new stencil. So it's a great big A4 it's like a spiral spiderweb stencil. I really like it. I think it's a really cool design. And I'm now going to paint in really warm tones my background, and I'm using unbleached titanium, and I'm also using a transparent umber in the Matisse. And I kind of mix them all together so that I can have gradient work and light and dark all the way through my page. And you see how I put all my paints in the middle of the palette, and I decide what blends I want to use. I'm just using a normal paintbrush to put this in rather than a sponge or a stippling brush. I find sometimes when I'm blending that way that it's easier to use an actual brush, and you just got to be careful about the bleeding. You see me fix up a little bit of the bleeding in that middle part later on. The trick to doing stenciling like this is to really have a dry brush that's got no water in it, and so you use a little bit more paint, yes, but you have more of a truer representation of the stencil. And you can see that I'm putting some lights and darks in, and just adding in where I'm going to put different compositional elements of the page together. Yeah, so I kind of like that. And I'll extend that a little bit through, so I'll rip it off in a sec. You can see. So I've got the nice big masking tape on the side, because when you're doing a full page stencil, doesn't that look really cool? So I'm just going to go out and clean all those areas out while the paint is still a bit wet. And because I'm putting things over the top of a lot of those things, it doesn't matter as much, but I do really want to clean up. I did really want to clean up some of the stencil lines, so it did work good for me. So I'm just putting sometimes I think you just have to be using stuff that's actually on your desk at the time. So I just used a washi tape thing, and I'm just painting in my first version of the moon. I end up painting over this quite a number of times. It's like, in the end, I really like this white, but then I add other things into it, and I don't like that as much. And what I end up with is completely different in the end, so it's weird. Yeah, it ends up being more kind of muted and stuff, but you get that as you go through this whole thing. And I know I haven't done a lot of these videos lately as part of my birthday present. So today is my birthday, and as part of my birthday present, my husband got me a new studio mic. Thank you, darling. And he just had a lot of we looked around a bit, because I had this brilliant Blue Yeti studio mic, and if any of you are considering getting studio mics, don't get Blue Yeti, because they're too heavy. And then if you have them on our often messy studio tables, sometimes they just tip over and fall off the table, or tip over and knock the table, and that's not great. So I've got a Spooky House stamp, and I rarely use this, but it's perfect for these sorts of pages. And I'm just using a Fiskars stamping platform there. I could use a Tim Holtz one, but I find that stamping platform for this kind of thing is pretty good. And now I'm mixing up a palette of black and unbleached titanium, and I'm going to colour the stamp in. And it makes me think too, like if I was using the Tim Holtz platform, I could probably then just position this and restamp over the top of my painted parts, rather than taking the time to then go and put them in with a pen. But I think sometimes I like the sketchy, you know, aspects that I add in. And yeah, so if you have a Tim Holtz stamping platform, which I do, you could stamp the house down, colour it all in, and then re-stamp all the dark over the top of that, because it would be in exactly the same position. So I would do that. So I'm just using a whole bunch of different, you know, the black and the greys and the titanium, but I'm leaving some of the orange, particularly in the roof tiles, but I don't want that showing through in the lower level where the front door is and stuff like that. And I don't want the white areas of the spider web showing through either. And if you can hear any tinkling bells in the background, that is one of my little kitties running around like a mad thing, which she does a couple of times a day. We put a bell on her because she has an underdeveloped voice box, so we need to know where she is because we can't hear her meowing. So it's funny, but that's what the tinkling is. I had someone comment on video that I was doing the other day where I couldn't voice over it, I had to do it all live, and they said, do you work in a pet store or something? And I went, no, that's just the sound of the birds and everything all around, and the cats and everything in the backyard. So it's like, oh, there we go, that's what my live environment actually sounds like. And that's why I tend to do voiceovers, apart from the fact that I can speed up what I'm doing, because this kind of work is quite tedious. It took a long time, and you don't necessarily want to see it in slow-mo, you know. You just want to go basically see the basic concept of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And, you know, if you want to recreate something like that, great. But I think with these kinds of videos, you know, my aim is to show you an application to use with the stencils that I use and the stamps that I have, or any drawing that I do, and how you can use something for a background and, you know, just make the whole thing work. And I think that Tim Holtz tissue paper is really good for setting up, you know, a really quite textured and complex background that I haven't had to completely create. And it allows for the surface to be reasonably smooth, so that when you're stamping on it, this is why I do it, right, rather than collaging ephemera and things like that, so that when you're going to stamp on it, like Vicky Papaneau does, you get a clear impression with your stamp, and you can just add, you know, texture in and whatever. But that just means that I don't have to draw the house in. And when I'm doing a quick journal page like this, I really don't want to. I just want to add in the sort of elements that I already have in my stash, and I don't have to actually go through all that scenario. So this pen that you see me using here is a Jane Davenport Epic pen, and I do a lot of sketching with it, but it has such a really, really fine nib, and the ink is waterproof graphite, and it's black, so it's perfect for doing really fine sketchy detail like putting in this stamp. But like I said earlier, you could really, if you were using a Tim Holtz platform, stamping platform, you could just get in and re-stamp it over the top, because it would be in exactly the same place that it was before. I liked the random element of because I think some of the lines that I sketched in were a little bit thinner than some of the actual stamp lines. But I wouldn't then go and do all the shingles on the roof tiles. I did the boards and the cladding, but I wouldn't do the shingles on the roof tiles. So I kind of left my paint a little bit translucent in areas so that you could still see them there, but I didn't re-stamp it. So what I'm doing here is outlining all of what you can see left of the stamp, the stencil, the spiderweb stencil, and just really defining it with that really fine black pen so that it's not kind of blurry, or it is actually, I want it to be, you know, I really want it to be there. It's quite stylized, and you can see that detail underneath any other painting that I do, or stencil work. I've got another skull stencil that I got inspiration from a tattoo stencil that I saw online, and I really liked it, and I've kind of simplified it a bit and done that, and that's one of the beauties of having a stencil cutting machine. It works really well like that. Now with the clouds, I'm using a Japanese glazing brush initially, and that allows me to have a really high water load without it dripping everywhere, which is something that our conventional brushes don't allow us to do. So there you see me using it again, and you can see the high water load I've got in that paint, and then that just allows me to bleed the paint out, which is exactly what I was wanting, because I want to see that spider web behind, but I really don't want it to dominate the landscape. I just want it to be an element to add features. This is actually a Jane Austen stamp, and it's like a Victorian stamp, but I wanted to have like these ghostly prints, and so I didn't press it down really heavily, but I put it in all in there because I wanted these kind of ghostly prints. I could have done something different, but I kind of like the old world thing. So here's this skull mask. It's actually a mask, and you know, sometimes you have to experiment the way that you actually use this to make it work for you. So I realized when I was doing this that it was probably good to actually tape it down. So when I did this, I just decided, yep, okay, I'm going to do that, and then I did some outlining on it, and that's with like the Anywhere pen, which is like a Nico or an alcohol marker, but it has a rollerball, and it's fabulous for mixed media applications, but it does tend to bleed through paint when you put the paint on top of it, and I say bleed through rather than you know, yeah, you can see a very gentle kind of and I could have left it there, to be honest, but the whole left hand side of the stencil seemed to get lost, so I decided that I was going to fill in all of those individual skulls with white, but of course that kind of blended in with the background, and that tree was done initially with a Tombow, so of course it's going to reactivate when this comes in. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through that whole process of painting these in and then seeing how they dry. I wanted some darker parts of it, not just all really white. I wanted it to give the illusion that there was light coming from the right, and you'll see some work done on that. And it's pretty cool, really. Different ways that you can use masks, and sometimes they can be, you know, just the basis of not having to sketch the whole thing in. You can see I'm painting over everything that I inked in, because I ended up deciding that I could just go over it with the stencil and redo it. But there are some problems with that, and you will see me go through those problems about what pens paint over paint really well, that are really fine, that can go in the stencil, and you know, how do we make that all work. And I went through quite a few different issues with that when this was all dry, and it was something that I would, you know, think most artists go through, but if you can learn a little bit from me, all well and good. So now I'm just adding me more white to just give a little bit more of a 3D effect to some of the stencils, so that they're not looking very two-dimensional, those things. So now I go in with a Tombow, and it looks grey over the white paint. It doesn't actually look black. So then I'm thinking to myself, you know, what pen will work? So then I finally decided to at least just put the marks in with the Uniball pen. It's a waterproof, fade-proof ink, and it's in a rollerball. It's only a 0.7, so you have to make sure that your paint is really dry before you use one of these, or you're just going to gouge the paint. and you know, you can ruin pens and that way. So I just put all of those marks in from the stencils, and then you're going to see me actually use paint, particularly in the eye and nose, any of those large circles, black paint, to go in and define that. But even over the white paint, it was looking pretty streaky for a while, so I needed to layer it and layer it. And these are some of the issues that you have in mixed media when you want to put, say, opaque, you know, not translucent layers over the top. They might be a bit more opaque, and you then go in and you want to complete those lines and have good defined spaces. So that's what I did here. I completed the lines and made them really defined, and now what I have to do is I'm using a golden fluid acrylic black paint. You see it's going on and looking a bit grey. So I'm going around and just putting in these spaces just to see what they look like, and then playing around a little bit more with a little bit of the shading in them, putting paint in, taking paint out. And that works better than any pen, either a paint over pen or anything. And you know, I was using a heat gun to dry things in between. So you know, that often will set the paint on top and then not set it underneath, and then you still have problems. So it's one of those things that you just have to be that little bit careful. I'm just redefining some of those lines and making them a bit thicker so that I can, you know, have some good space in between. And I want to see some of the background, but I really want those skull, you know, parts defined. And I just start using the paintbrush to make some of those features stronger. And I'm using a 0 paintbrush here as well, so it makes it work, you know, it makes it easier for me to work with. And now I'm just darkening some areas so you can just see a little bit the way the light's going, and it just looks just that touch more realistic. It doesn't always. So now I'm just sealing some of those tomboy paints with a little bit of the black to go over the top, and we're just getting right to the end. It's very cool. And this is an eye from Blue Indigo. And that's a script stamp that I just wanted to add a little bit of extra script in. So I'm just using a 0.7 white Signo pen just to finalize a few things and put my writing in, and don't come out to play in the woods today. You don't know who you will meet. So, and it was just something that was going through my mind. I don't know where it comes from. It's not an actual quote. Ciao for now. Hope you've enjoyed.